The world of Pokémon is filled with criminals doing everything they can to make your life miserable. Some are almost harmless, stealing trainers' Pokémon, others have more ambitious goals, trying to cause world-ending natural disasters. But while everyone always asks why, nobody wonders what the life of a Pokémon criminal really looks like. Hi, I'm Ryo. I like to make things harder than they have to be, and today I will tell you the story of how I became a Pokémon criminal and pulled off the biggest heist in Unnovan history. To make it even harder, I also made this challenge a hardcore nuzlocke following the rules set on screen right now. While encounters are usually limited to 1 per route, I decided to change that up a little. In this nuzlocke, I will be forced to find 1 encounter for each of the classic heist character tropes, such as the new kid, the getaway driver, or the loose cannon for comical relief. With that, everything was set up and I was ready to dive into this adventure. Nuvema, a small town in the middle of nowhere. It might not seem like much, because it really isn't, but this is where it all begins. My colleagues Sharon, Bianca and I have been sent here by our boss Juniper months ago, but never knew why. That was going to change today, as she sent one of her henchmen to brief us about our hardest mission yet. The goal was to steal Getz's scepter. He was the leader of Team Plasma, a massive criminal organization that was running Unova from the shadows. Almost every major city was controlled by one of his leaders. It would take more than just a few grunts to pull off a heist of this scale, which is exactly why upper management hired the 3 of us. The best of the best, if you will. First up was Charon. As the pickpocket of the team, he had the smooth talk and fast hands necessary to make you part with your most valuable possessions, whether you wanted to or not. The second member was Bianca, who was responsible for communication and to coordinate every meticulous detail of our missions. And finally, myself. I never excelled at anything until I got my first Pokeball. Fighting is what I do best. Luckily, the boss spared us the initial hassle of stealing Pokemon by sending us the 3 fine specimen we borrowed from a high-security safari zone not long ago. When looking at the bunch, Tepig stood out to me the most. He surely wasn't the quickest nor smartest, but I felt like he was the type of Pokemon to always find a way through tough situations. So I took Cody under my wings to make use of his untapped potential. After sorting out the last details, Sharon, Bianca and I split up to work on our parts of the plan. With that, it was time to get moving. My first task was to learn about our target. During the briefing, Juniper told us that Getz's never leaves his scepter out of sight. We received intel that he was going to visit the villages in the outskirts of Castelia to inspect his empire's supply chain. So, my best bet to see what this man was all about was to head to the nearby Accumula town and wait for him to show up there. During my travels, I was attacked by a feisty Lillipup, and since my team was looking quite modest at the moment, I decided to catch this little gal and named her Phoebe. Every good heist needs a reliable escape option, and Stoutland was perfect for that. Not long after this encounter, I arrived at my destination, and wouldn't you know it, Getz's showed up almost simultaneously. I knew this man was intimidating, but seeing him in person made me realize why he was ruling over this place undisputed for decades. Looking at the way he talked to people though, it quickly became clear that they didn't follow him because they had a common goal, but out of fear. That got me thinking. Someone this far out of his immediate grasp had to despise the man, and it wouldn't take long for me to find who I was looking for. After questioning my way through some alleyway bandits, I eventually got a hint that the nearby Stratus village was controlled by Sylin, Chili and Cress, ambitious triplets that hated nothing more than being under someone else's heel. They also happened to be in charge of smuggling cargo into the region for Team Plasma. I eventually reached the inconspicuous town and quickly found the place they were operating their business from. Getting information out of them wasn't going to be easy, considering the punishment for betraying Getz's was pretty much being erased from the face of the earth. The only way to make them talk was the old-fashioned one. So my squad and I barged through the front entrance, found the biggest guy, and challenged him to a battle. Cress brought out Lillipup first. It went for a workup while Tepig got in a free tackle. After getting chomped by a critical bite, another attack brought the puppy down to the yellow. The next bite didn't do nearly as much, allowing Cody to finish Cress's first Pokemon while also recovering some health due to a held Oranberry. There was only Panper left, and despite getting hit by a super effective water gun, Cody held on, allowing him to get in one last bit of damage before switching into Phoebe. She luckily took no damage on the switch, as Panper greedily went for a workup. From there, Phoebe easily shrugged off the incoming water guns, allowing her to do what she came here for and clean up the fight with 2 more tackles. With Cress defeated, the other 2 didn't even want to try and stop me. Without further questions, Sylin gave me access to the documents perfectly detailing Plasma's trading routes and schedules. It didn't take long for Bianca to find my next target, the Nakreen City Black Market. Led by none other than Lenora herself, this establishment was known far and wide for its exclusive wares. The most precious amongst them was information. While getting into this market would prove to be impossible under regular circumstances, luck was on our side once again. The documents revealed that a few days from now, a small group of grunts was scheduled to deliver expensive art pieces to the market. the perfect opportunity to sneak in. After releasing the grunts responsible for the cargo from the burden of wearing their uniforms, Sharon and I appeared at the drop-off location in their stead, and the artworks were handed to us with no further questions asked. Once everyone left, I realized that 2 Pokémon probably weren't enough to infiltrate an underground market filled to the brim with scumbags and thieves. I scoured the nearby area for additional help, and eventually bumped into what I was looking for: John the Drillbur and Butch the Timber, or as I like to call them, the Burr brothers. During this little detour, Cody and Phoebe also gained enough strength to evolve, and the Kreen City eventually appeared on the horizon. While the untrained eye would suspect the market to be located in one of the many century-old warehouses, my hound instincts led me straight to the public museum. The grunts in Wellspring telling me exactly where to go might also have played a tiny role in that decision. Once inside, I dropped off the cargo, and it wasn't long before I found Lenora. She had exactly what I was looking for, but wasn't going to give it up without a fight. Around these parts, information isn't free after all. She sent out her herdier as I matched the lead with Phoebe for an intimidate. From there, I switched into Butch to tank a takedown, and went right back to Phoebe to weaken my opponent's attack even further. On the next turn, I brought out Cody as he gets his defense lowered by a leer. My chunky little friend then not only hits a brutal flame charge, but also dodges a crucial takedown in the process. Despite Lenora's desperate attempt to heal her puppy with super potions, 2 more flame charges later, Cody was now standing face to face with the criminal's ace Watchhawk. This insanely fast meerkat was now threatening me with a stat boost that retaliate, which would almost certainly kill any of my Pokémon. Luckily, the speed boosts from Flame Charge allowed Cody to outspeed and go for the legendary Arm Thrust Gambit. It paid off and hit 4 times in a row, making this an easy victory over Lenora. Seconds after the battle was over, a guard stormed into the room. A bunch of grunts were packing up items from the market. After recent riots within their organization, Plasma higher-ups decided to make an example out of several establishments throughout the region. They confiscated most of Lenora's wares and headed towards the Pinwheel Forest. In and out, before anyone could even question what was happening. While Lenora promised me answers, she also couldn't let Plasma get away with this. I had no other choice but to help her get her stuff back. During our pursuit, we happened to bump into Burke. He was a known expert in art forgery and witnessed the entire thing while looking to sell some of his pieces in the market. Afraid that he was going to be next, he suggested we take Plasma down together before they could make it out of the forest. We agreed, and with combined forces, we took the grunts down one by one until they had no other choice but to return the wares to their rightful owner. Well, not that Lenora owned them in the first place, but you know what I mean. As promised, she helped me out in my endeavors as well. According to her ever-listening merchants, Clay, the CEO of a construction company, keeps bragging about being the one who built parts of the Plasma hideout. Considering how important that job must have been, he probably still had the blueprints somewhere. Since the castle was said to be highly guarded, obtaining them was crucial to guarantee the success of our mission. Before I could make my way to Driftvale, however, I had a more pressing matter to solve. Burke was nowhere to be found. This weasel took the first opportunity to slip away unnoticed and stab Lenora and I in the back to save his own skin. I immediately picked up pursuit, and after searching through some dirty alleys, found his sticky gallery not long after. This coward needed to be taken care of before he could threaten our mission any further. I sent in John to match Burke's Whirlipede. There wasn't really anything it could do to my Pokémon, allowing me to go for a dig right away. The attack did more than half, as the angry Pillbug then drastically lowered John's defenses. That didn't really matter since I was faster, and so I was safe to go for another attack, taking Burke's helpless lead out without a problem. Afraid to get overran by a tiny mole, he then immediately sent in his ace next. As a response, I brought out Cody to tank the now resisted Razor Leaf, and after a Protect, shrugged off another before one-shotting Leavenny with a single flame charge. Burke's last hope was his Dwebble. I switched into Phoebe to absorb a smackdown, while also intimidating her opponent in the process. From there, all I had to do was to slowly whittle the tiny crap down, and Burke was ultimately defeated. With no Pokémon left to protect him, I handed this red over to Lenora, who was going to pin the entire Plasma attack on him. One problem less to worry about. I was on my way to leave for Driftvale as Bianca called in an emergency meeting. Using the trading route documents provided by the triplets, she was able to pinpoint the central location for the Plasma supply chain, the Mistralton Cargo Airport. Disrupting it would leave them with no other choice but to increase security measures, and since Getzes would never expect anyone crazy enough to attack their hideout, that was probably where these additional forces would be taken from. The perfect distraction to make infiltrating it a walk in the park. Unfortunately, no one in our squad had any idea of how to pull off a stunt like that. We did know someone we worked with in the past, but things didn't really end on good terms after the Pikachu accident. Seeing how this was our only option, however, I had the pleasure of heading to Nimbasa and convince our old friend to help us out. During my journey, I also happened to encounter a new member for my team, Don the Sandile. He doesn't even remotely look like a criminal, but trust me, that will change in due time. Fast forward to Nimbasa. If you ask me, an unhinged hacker with a god complex is the last person I would hire to run an amusement park, but what do I know? It at least made it a lot easier to find her. I am certain Alisa must have noticed my arrival because she made sure the only way to get to her was by fighting through a bunch of trainers on the unstable mess she called a roller coaster. The only upside was that after all these battles, Butch grew strong enough to evolve. To top this crazy nightmare off, she also wasn't going to talk to me unless I was able to prove myself worthy of her time by defeating her in a battle. With little choice but to obey to her lunacy, I grabbed my Pokeballs and took her challenge on. Phoebe and Emolga hit the field first. The flying squirrel was faster and went for a Volt Switch into Alisa's second Emolga, who not only takes 50% from a Rock Tomb, but also gets its speed lowered in the process. This allowed my Herdier to pick up an easy KO with Retaliate. Alisa then brought out her backstabbing Emolga once again. At this point, I was sure that it is as crazy as its owner because it happily Volt Switched into Zebstrika, who now was forced to face a similar fate to its teammate. Confused by my opponent's battle strategies, I then went into Drillbur for free as he absorbs the incoming Volt Switch. Being faster, John was able to pick up a clean one-shot with a dig, which left Alisa with only her crazy Emolga on the field. It wasn't done fighting yet, however, as it connected with a strong aerial ace before getting hit into the yellow by a Rock Tomb. Since John was now in crit range, I went into Phoebe to tank the attack, and wouldn't you know it, it actually would have been a crit. From there, all my reliable partner had to do was to go for a final Retaliate to seal the deal. Despite this defeat not sitting too well with her pride, Alisa decided to help me out for old time's sake and loosely put together a hacking device to be installed at the cargo airport. Once it was connected, she could shut the entire thing down within minutes. With that, I had everything I needed and left Alisa and Nimbasa City behind me. The road towards Driftvale was quite uneventful, and once I got there, I spent some days observing the situation. I quickly noticed that Clay's company property was under surveillance 24/7, and there was no way around his guards either. There was no way I could pull this off on my own, and so I met up with Charon at the Driftvale Inc. storage building not far out of town. The plan was simple. Since getting into Clay's office wasn't an option with all of his guards around, I needed to lure them out and give Charon enough time to sneak in and steal the blueprints. Even though my team was able to defeat multiple top-tier criminals, this might be a lot more than they could handle at their current level. I invested some time in training and evolved both John and Don before receiving Charon's signal and heading straight into the storage buildings. After taking on an entire warehouse worth of grunts, Clay and his security staff eventually showed up, and let me tell you, they were as unhappy to see me as I was to see them. I was cornered and running wasn't an option. My only way out was to fight. I lead the battle with my newly evolved Excadrill, and Clay brings out his Krokorok. It was threatening me with a Bulldoze KO, but I outspeed, and a soft sand boosted dig was enough to send it right back to its Pokeball. Second came Palpitoad, but it too got steamrolled by John's massive attack. Last for Clay was his own Excadrill, but not even that was able to stop my secret weapon. Clay fell without hitting a single attack. Inspired by John's impressive display of strength, Butch wanted nothing more but to follow in his footsteps and evolved right after the battle as well. Startled by how easy it was to overpower their boss, Clay's guards didn't even bother stopping me from leaving. Luckily, this whole gauntlet gave Charon enough time to acquire the blueprints. The puzzle pieces were slowly falling into place. Up to this point, most of our encounters with Team Plasma could be seen as mere coincidence, but it was only a matter of time before Getsis was going to connect the dots. Our advantage was that he had no way of knowing what we were planning. Despite that, we needed to move quickly. Bianca located the fastest way to Mistleton, which led directly through the dangerous Chargestone Cave. It was filled to the brim with shady creatures looming in the shadows. One of them was a tiny Joltik, ready to rumble the second we crossed paths. Acting all tough was part of both of our daily routines, and that's why he was the perfect fit for my team. With a full party of 6, I traversed the rest of the cave to meet up with Bianca. She spent the meantime tracking down and arranging a meeting with our next partner in crime, the ex-Plasma pilot Skyla. She knew every nook and cranny of the Mistleton Cargo Airport and was our best chance to deploy the hacking device unnoticed. To avoid any unnecessary attention, our rendezvous point was at the top of the Celestial Tower, located not far from town. During my ascent of this glorified graveyard, I also happened to encounter another perfect addition to the team, Amber the Litwick. Together, we scaled the tower where Skyla was already waiting for us. Seeing how Team Plasma left her to rot in a prison cell after she got caught importing Hoenn Pokémon, she was more than willing to help us out. Since this would put her own safety at great risk, Skyla needed proof that our team was strong enough to see it through. It was time to show her what I was made of. The young pilot sent out her Swoobat to set up with Amnesia, but John did what he does best and picked up a clean KO with a Shadow Claw. Swanna was out second and immediately went for an Aqua Ring while getting hit into the yellow by a Rock Tomb. This allowed Excadrill to outspeed and land a Shadow Claw, only to barely miss out on a kill and taking a super effective Bubble Beam in return. Skyla was going to heal next, but against my better judgment, I decided not to switch out and used this opportunity to go for another attack. Risking a crit, I went for a greedy Rock Tomb to once again miss out on the kill and getting knocked into the red as well. Expecting a Bubble Beam, I then finally switched out into Ian, only for him to fall victim to a super effective Air Slash. Fortunately, the 2 speed drops from Rock Tomb barely allowed him to outspeed and retaliate with a quad effective Electro Web for a clean kill. Skyla's last resort was her Pheasant, forcing me to bring out Dawn. He tanked the Razor Wind and dished out a chunk of damage with Crunch in return. At this point, my team was pretty low, and so after attacking for a second time, I was left with no other choice but to bring out Butch. Thankfully, he has great natural bulk and survived an Air Slash to finish the fight with one final Rock Slide. Even if this battle was way closer than it should have been, Skyla saw that I had what it takes to pull this heist off. I handed over the hacking device, and with that, the success of our mission was now in her and Elisa's control. All that was left for Charon and I to do was to follow Bianca's plan to the letter and take the fastest path towards the Plasma hideout, which happened to lead us directly through an abandoned mining site. With the day of the heist fast approaching, training was key, and so I put in some more work with my team to make sure we are in our best form. As a result, Phoebe, Cody, Ian and Dawn all reached their final evolution. I felt more than ready to move on. Despite being shut off for decades now, the rare Pokémon popping up in the abandoned mine shafts attracted countless trainers looking for their next big catch. While their presence didn't bother us at all, we could not get rid of the feeling that someone was following us. Whenever we tried to get rid of the eyes lurking in the shadow, they just appeared to become more and more. As we were approaching the exit, our pursuers quickly revealed themselves to be Plasma Grunts working for none other than Getz's right-hand Drayden. We should have known that they were never going to leave Skyla out of their sight, and so she must have accidentally led them directly onto our track. While defeating a bunch of grunts was an easy task that even Charon could handle, getting through the one in charge would prove to be a more challenging endeavor. Bryson, also known as the Butcher, was feared by many and beaten by none. But that was going to change today. Cody's first snack was a tasty little Vanillish. Since it was slower, one super effective Flame Charge not only sends it back into its Pokeball right away, but also raises Embor's speed just enough to outrun the Kingpin's remaining Pokemon. Beartic came in next. It barely survived the hit before going for a Swagger, confusing Cody and ruining my entire setup. I couldn't risk attacking, and so I was forced to bring out Phoebe on a Hyper Potion. She wasn't really threatened here, allowing her to chip away on the Polar Bear's health bar with a Rock Tomb. The resulting speed drop meant that Cody was once again faster. I brought him in on a predicted Icicle Crush to finish Beartic off with a single hit. Bryson's final wall of defense was his Cryogonal, but the only two things it had going for itself were its speed and its special defense, which both failed to protect it against Embor's brute force. Taking down such a legendary fighter gave me a rush I never felt before. This emotional high was quickly turned into a panic as I spotted a Plasma Grunt running off in the distance. This was the worst case scenario. If she could reach Drayden's lair in Opaloosid City before we could stop her, things could take a turn for the worse really quickly. Charon and I split up and picked up pursuit. Unfortunately, despite our best efforts, we lost track of our target in the Moor of Icarus. Left with no other choice, we decided to break into Drayden's base and take him out before he could report everything to Getz's. As a backup, we also gave Elisa the signal to disable the cargo airport's entire system in hopes that the ensuing chaos would earn us some more time to stop him. Before pressing on, I met up with a shady dealer to buy a Duskstone, which allowed me to fully evolve Ember. My team was as ready as it could be, and with no time to waste, I headed into the Dragon's Den. There were guards around every corner, and each of them was stronger than the last. But that wasn't going to stop me. I continued moving and eventually made it to the top, where I was quickly taken by surprise. Drayden's daughter was awaiting me in his stead. He apparently left town for business, and bored out of her mind, Iris decided that she was in charge of her dad's empire now. Watching me fight through her army of grunts was the only exciting thing that happened around here for days, and so she offered me a deal. If I could defeat her in battle, she wasn't going to tell old Getz's what I was up to. While fighting a kid definitely wasn't on my schedule today, I surely wasn't going to risk the mission and obliged. She led with Fracture, and I brought out my Excadrill. Knowing nothing could really damage me here, I went for a Swords Dance, which Iris matched with a Dragon Dance of her own. I luckily still outsped, which meant my mole was free to KO not 1, not 2, but all 3 of her Pokémon with 1 attack each. This was easier than the one time I stole a balloon from a baby in an amusement park. But unlike that baby, Iris wasn't a sore loser at all. Quite the opposite, in fact. She promised that she would train harder than ever before and challenge me again someday. Free to leave, I contacted Bianca, who confirmed that there were no suspicious activities that suggest our mission was compromised. Charon even managed to track down the escaped grunt, tying up all loose ends. Skyla, who stayed behind to observe the Mistralton area, reported that large groups of grunts were arriving by the minute. Our diversion worked out just as expected. Getz's hideout was as unprotected as it could ever be. Bianca already scouted the area and discovered a route that was going to take me past the remaining guards almost all the way into the hideout. She warned me that people generally try to avoid these mountains due to the tons of dangerous Pokémon residing in the area, many of which would make a great addition to my team, and thus I made a short detour to acquire 2 new members, Dante and Quinn. Shortly after, I reached the end of the path, and with that, made it all the way to Getz's castle unnoticed. It was time to pull off the greatest heist Unova had ever seen. Ever since Nuvema, I encountered a lot of Pokémon, without which I probably never would have made it this far. But I could only bring 6 to this final mission. It was a hard choice, but I eventually made up my mind. To guarantee the success of the heist, I needed Amber and John to break down obstacles on the way, Dawn, Quinn and Dante in case things got tricky, and finally, Phoebe to make a quick escape once I got the scepter. We were ready to do this. Once inside, Bianca informed me that the castle walls were starting to block out our communication systems. From here on out, I was on my own. Everything seemed to be going according to plan when 4 figures suddenly appeared out of nowhere. The trainers blocking my way were none other than the top dogs of the plasma food chain. I was now standing face to face with the strongest trainers plasma had to offer, and the only way to successfully complete my mission was right through them. My first opponent was Caitlin. She's known to use the psychic powers of her Pokémon to force her victims to hand over their possessions on their own. Since she never got caught red-handed, Caitlin always claimed that her victims merely donated these things to her. But those party tricks weren't going to work on me. Thanks to an equipped Shadow Attack, Amber's Shadow Ball effortlessly one-shot both Reuniclus and Musharna. Sigilif was a much harder target to take down in one hit, and so I went into Dawn, who not only resists the incoming Ghost-type attack, but also jumps his way right through the fancy Wind Chime thanks to his new pair of sunglasses. Unfortunately for Caitlin, Dawn also resists all of Gothitel's moves, so even if one attack doesn't pick up a KO, there was nothing her ace could do to stop me. My second challenger was Chantal. She made a name for herself by draining massive amounts of money from the Unovan banks without ever getting caught either. Pretty handy when your ghost types can simply walk through walls and take whatever it is you desire with them. How fitting that Ember drained the life of each of her Pokémon in return, 1 peekaboo at a time. Grimsley was a trickster who raised mischievous Pokémon to befriend trainers only to disappear with their belongings the second they were left unattended. Their bulk also made it difficult to just brute force my way through, but I had a plan. Undeterred by Scrafty's super effective crunch, I started to battle off with Ember for a 3rd time now. She had one job in this fight, and it was to land a Will-O-Wisp to cut her opponent's damage in half and pave the way for the real sweeper. Luckily, the move landed despite its questionable accuracy, meaning the incoming attack barely did any damage. I then immediately switched into John, but he unfortunately got his accuracy lowered by a sand attack. Since missing a move could be fatal here, I decided to pivot through Ember until I eventually got Excadrill onto the field on a resisted crunch. On the next turn, I went for a Swords Dance to double John's damage as he got hit into the yellow by a Brick Break. With my setup complete, there was nothing Grimsley could do to stop me. Scrafty, Crocodile, Bisharp and Liepard all fell to an Earthquake each. The last obstacle standing between me and Getz's was Marshall. Starting out as a mere grunt, he rose through the ranks of Team Plasma by proving his dedication and skill in battle time and time again. We were not that different, him and I, but only one of us could leave this ring victorious. Throw was up first, which I matched with Dante for his debut battle. A boosted acrobatics immediately took care of Marshall's lead, which forced him to bring out his most dangerous Pokémon next. While Frail, Sawk has the Sturdy ability, which allows it to always survive one hit. I couldn't stay in, and so I switched into the only Pokémon I knew was bulky enough to tank the incoming damage. Phoebe. She skillfully dodged the Stone Edge on the switch, making it even safer to go for a little chip damage with Crunch while shrugging off a Karate Chop like it was nothing. With Sturdy broken, I could now go back into Dante on a resisted attack and plow through the rest of Marshall's team with ease. All 4 of Gets's top trainers were defeated, and it appears the battles were quick enough to not draw any additional attention. Despite this unplanned inconvenience, everything else seemed to be going according to plan. If the blueprints were correct, I was slowly closing in on the throne room, but there was a noticeable tension in the air. A few moments later, my goal was finally in sight. I walked up to the door as I heard clapping behind me. It was Gets's, his scepter in hand, surrounded by his son N, and more grunts than I could ever take on. Turns out that the anonymous customer who hired us to do this job was none other than the crime lord himself. There were rumors about someone trying to challenge his rule, and so he needed to confirm who amongst his subjects could be trusted. The best way to weed out the snakes was to get someone else to do it for him. Seeing how I defeated multiple top-tier criminals within his organization, he wanted to put me to a final test, which I passed with flying colors. Nobody had ever beaten his top trainers before. Gets's now gave me a choice: join his ranks or get crushed right here and now. There was no way I was going to give up. The mission was almost over, and I wasn't going to betray my team. I pulled my Pokeball, and the grunts eagerly pulled theirs. That is when Gets's stopped his barking hounds. He wanted to see where my real limits are and was sure N could take me down. I was more than ready to prove him wrong. It was obvious that the protection of his father's organization lured him into a false sense of security, because power isn't everything. As the saying goes, the higher they climb, the harder they fall. Before Reshiram could make a single move, John already depleted its entire health with a quad-effective Earthquake. The following Clink Clang quickly followed suit and also revealed itself to be N's ace Zoroark instead. Bad move to sacrifice your strongest pawn like that, son. That means one of his biggest threats was already taken care of. Caracosta came in next to retaliate with a waterfall, and since its sturdy ability prevented me from taking it out in one go, I brought out the old reliable to fix the problem. She unfortunately gets caught off guard by a critical hit, but I came prepared as I held Citrus Berry, recovered a lot of the damage. On the next turn, this allowed Phoebe to go for a crunch before dodging yet another crucial Stone Edge, just like she did with Marshall before. With Sturdy broken, I could now bring John back in on a Stone Edge to clean up Caracosta with an Earthquake. My next job was to somehow take care of N's Vanillux. While I had a pretty safe switch into Ember, there was always a chance of getting frozen by a blizzard. Luckily, she was able to avoid that fate. On the next turn, a Flame Burst barely missed out on the KO, but Vanillux only set up Hail, meaning I was free to repeatedly fire Shadow Balls into it until the Ice Cream Cone ultimately went down. This brings me directly to my next problem, Archeops. Similar to my own, this thing is fast and hits way too hard, but only as long as it stays above 50% HP. I had to come up with a plan to play around this menace. Predicting N was going for a crunch, I brought out Dawn and got the call right. Since I was faster, I could now go for a foul play to bring it into the yellow, immediately cutting its damage in half. From there, one hit took the Ancient Bird down, leaving N with only one Pokemon left to fight. Pretty sure he now wished he hadn't sacrificed his Zoroark earlier. Going for Bulldoze was the obvious play here, but I didn't want to risk losing Dawn to a Hyper Beam in case he couldn't pick up the KO in one hit, and so I switched into Ember. She absorbed the predicted attack, and with one last Flame Burst, took Clink Clang and N down together with it. The smirk on my face after this one-sided battle must have ignited something within Gets's. I had never seen a man so crushed, and yet so furious at the same time. Nobody within his ranks has managed to beat me, and he realized that he was cornered. Gets's held enough and threw his scepter aside to challenge me to a final showdown. I'm sure he can barely remember the last time he was in a battle, and yet here we are. This has become much more than a heist. I had the chance to take down the entire Plasma Empire right here, right now. The old man sent his Cofagrigus into the fray, and I still had John leading my party. Since I was in a pretty safe position, I used Sword Stance to boost my attack, which Gets's left unpunished as he went for a Protect. With my damage doubled, Earthquake was more than enough to send Cofagrigus right back to its Pokeball. Unfortunately, Gets's now revealed his ace Hydreigon. This thing was bulky enough to survive any of John's attacks, and so I brought out Ember, who was immune to the incoming Focus Blast. I then switched into Quinn, who barely took any damage from the anticipated Surf. There now were two mighty dragons facing each other. Despite the level difference, mine was faster, and a single Dragon Claw was all it took to fell the Hydra. Gets's started to look even more worried now. His Bouffalante hit the field next to threaten Quinn with a head charge. After a tactical switch into Ember, she was able to land a Will-O-Wisp, which let her shrug off an Earthquake. Since I still had no immediate way of taking such a bulky Pokemon out in one swipe, I had to get creative here. In hopes to slowly stall out Bouffalante's barrage of attacks, I brought in Archeops on every Earthquake and Excadrill on every Wild Charge until the bull was finally in range for Acrobatics. This worked out perfectly and Bisharp hit the field next, but it stood no chance against the combination of U-Turn and Earthquake. Running low on Pokemon, Gets's sent out Seismitoad next, and all I had to do was repeat the same spiel again. I switched in Archeops on an Earthquake, who took no damage thanks to its flying type. On the next turn I went for an Acrobatics, ready to sacrifice Dante if I had to, but the Crime Lord's move of choice was Rain Dance instead. Despite the doubled speed, there was no way his frog was faster, meaning it too fell victim to Dante the Great. With that, there was only Electros left to beat. To start things off, a U-turn allowed me to bring out Quinn, who took barely any damage from the incoming Wild Charge. Thanks to her Molt Breaker ability, she was able to deal massive damage with a super effective Bulldoze before barely surviving a crunch in return. I thought Ghetsis was going to heal next and went for a greedy Dragon Dance, which quickly turned out to be a mistake as Quinn fell right before the end. While her sacrifice was very dramatic and completely unnecessary, it didn't change anything on the outcome of this battle because Phoebe swooped in, grabbed the scepter, and avenged her friend with one last attack. It was finally over. After all the work that went into this, not only did we manage to pull off the biggest heist in Pokémon history, we also took down the entirety of Team Plasma on the way. While the future of Unova was unclear, my team and I had our eyes already set on the next adventure. And that's it. I managed to beat a Pokémon heist Nuzlocke, and it was such a great challenge to play. As always, make sure to let me know if you enjoyed this narrative Nuzlocke style and what kind of challenge and story you would like to see me do next. Thanks for watching.